Judah's journey ended in the Babylonian exile, a painful yet necessary consequence of persistent sin and rebellion against God. Despite the harsh judgment, prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel provided messages of hope, promising future restoration and renewal. The prophets had long warned Judah about the dangers of straying from God's commandments. They called for repentance, urging the people to abandon idolatry, injustice, and disobedience. Jeremiah, known as the Weeping Prophet, delivered some of the most profound warnings. His sorrow for Judah's spiritual state was deep. He lamented the people's stubbornness and their unwillingness to heed God's call. Jeremiah's prophecies foretold Jerusalem's fall and the destruction of the temple, but the people refused to listen. They continued in their sinful ways, dismissing his warnings as overly pessimistic. Isaiah, another major prophet, had spoken earlier about Judah's disobedience and the coming judgment, but he also prophesied about the suffering servant who would one day bring healing and restoration to God's people. His prophecies hinted at a future hope, a promise that God's ultimate plan would unfold despite Judah's failings. Isaiah's message of redemption and renewal remained a source of comfort, even as exile loomed. In 586 BC, the inevitable happened. Jerusalem fell to Babylon. The temple, a sacred center of worship and symbol of God's presence among his people, was destroyed. The city was left in ruins, and many of Judah's inhabitants were taken into captivity in Babylon. This exile was devastating, shattering Judah's national identity and leaving the people feeling abandoned. Their homeland was lost, and they found themselves in a foreign land, far from the city where God had once dwelled among them. Amid this tragedy, the prophet Ezekiel, already exiled in Babylon, received visions that offered a glimmer of hope. His prophecies contained powerful imagery of restoration, including the famous vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, where God's breath brought life to what was once dead. Ezekiel's message was clear. Despite the severity of Judah's punishment, God had not forsaken his people. He spoke of a new covenant, a restored relationship in which God would write his laws on their hearts. This vision of a renewed covenant sustained the exiled people, assuring them that God's plans were not entirely shattered. The Babylonian exile was a transformative period for Judah. It was a time of reflection and reformation, leading the people to understand the significance of obedience and genuine worship. Through the hardship, God's promises remained firm, and the prophet's messages of restoration gave the exiled community hope for a future return to their homeland. Judah's journey reminds us that while God's judgment is real, his mercy and faithfulness endure. Applications. Judah's downfall teaches us to take God's warnings seriously. When God highlights areas in our lives that need correction, it's essential to respond in humility and make changes before consequences become inevitable. The Babylonian exile was marked by loss, but God's presence continued to comfort his people. In our own trials, we can trust that God is present and that he will not abandon us, even in difficult times. Prophets like Ezekiel conveyed hope even as judgment unfolded. This reminds us that, with God, there is always a path to restoration, no matter how severe the circumstances. Judah's persistent refusal to turn back to God led to exile. True repentance involves a sincere heart change and a commitment to align our lives with God's will, not just outward conformity. Despite Judah's failures, God remained faithful. He fulfilled his promises of restoration, showing that his commitment to his people is unbreakable. We can hold on to God's promises, knowing He is faithful even when we falter.